Good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Ron Kaminer, and this is webinar number 39. I was supposed to be doing this webinar with my close friend, Jeff Horowitz, but unfortunately, a family emergency took him away. So you're stuck with me once again the entire night. And this webinar is going to be a little bit different. It's entitled Open Our Eyes, Let's Do Something Different. And what Shofu has tried to do with these webinars is really create a situation where we learn from our mistakes. And that's what the goal is for this webinar tonight. We're going to give you alternatives to where we make mistakes in restorative dentistry. And I'm going to open your eyes to some things you may or may not actually know. So a little bit different tonight. It's a little bit of a different spin, and I hope you enjoy it. I had a good time putting this together. As you know, I do work with many manufacturers. Shofu is one of my close friends in the industry, and I want to thank Shofu for sponsoring this program. As you know, I love friends, so please friend me at Vino Dentino on Instagram, and that's where I show all new dental technology and some incredible Napa wine. There's some real cool technology on there now that you should take a look at. I think I have it even in this presentation tonight, but if not, you'll see it on my Instagram page at Vino Dentino. I'm also a proud member of Catapult Education. We're a group of key opinion leaders that speak, teach, and consult with many dental manufacturers, some of which are depicted here on this slide. And that allows me to work through any new products, materials, issues, report back to companies before they release a product into the market. So when you get to use it, you have a clean slate. It is totally good, totally clean, and you know that you're not going to have any issues with the product. So today, we're going to focus on restorative dentistry, bread and butter of what we do day in and day out, where most of our patients on a given day, we're doing some form of restorative dentistry. And today we're going to focus specifically on direct restorative dentistry, and more specifically on the class 2 preparation and restoration. So we know our class 2 is routine day-to-day dentistry. And most of us treat these lesions the same way we always have. We were taught in dental school. GV Black, class 2, convenience form, retention form, resistance form, some kind of form, and then adopted those mantras into the world of composite dentistry, since those were really designed for amalgam. And with all of that, we see our successes and we see our failures. And usually our failures happen because the tooth has been compromised or poor technique. So why do we see failures? First of all, poor technique, isolation, curing light inadequacy, not following instructions, poor proximal contacts, an inadequate matrix, poor sealing of the gingival box. And then, of course, doing the same thing for every size of lesion. What do? We take a burr, we cut a box. We extend a little bit of a fin onto the occlusal, let the caries decide where we're going, or the existing restoration decide where we're going. But in virgin teeth, we still cut that box. We still cut that occlusal preparation. We still do things the same way. My son, Matt, was a college wrestler. He was a Division III college wrestler. And he wrestled at a school called Washington and Lee down in Virginia. Some of you might know it. And his wrestling coach used to say to the kids, if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you always got. And if nothing changes, nothing changes. Very, very poignant quotes when we consider and speak about class 2 restorative dentistry. Here's an article of JDR 2016, the 10-year survival of class 2 restorations placed by GPs. And I took a quote out of it. It says, however, restoration size included surfaces has a greater impact on restoration survival in premolar teeth. What they're saying is that as these restorations get large and larger and larger, the restoration survival decreases. Yet if we still have incipient decay on a bicuspid, we are ingrained to cutting that box, destroying that marginal ridge and cutting the box. What we have to keep in mind is actually the peripheral rim of enamel. The peripheral rim of enamel, that external part of enamel that includes the marginal ridge, is what keeps that tooth intact. Think of this peripheral rim as a chain link fence. If I took the poles out of the chain link fence, the fence will collapse on itself. But once the poles are in, that chain link fence is strong. The minute I break this peripheral rim by cutting this box, this tooth weakens dramatically, and long-term survival rate of that restoration is decreased by a substantial margin. The marginal ridge is a part of that peripheral rim of enamel, but it is a strengthening point of that peripheral rim. We also know that the peripheral rim is one of the main stress distribution structures in a tooth. We want to preserve it when at all possible. So this large amalgam here, yes, it might have been dictated by decay, but that peripheral rim was totally destroyed. If we can conserve it, we'll be in much better shape. So I ask all of you, what if we thought differently? What if we take what we were taught in school and just put it on the back burner just a little bit, but think a little bit differently, especially with incipient early decay? If we're going to think differently, we may have to use different materials. And one of the things that we see today in dentistry is we see, whether it's in restorative materials, endodontic filling materials, oral surgery materials, periosurgery materials, and you name it, we see this term bioactivity being used. It's become this catchphrase or an overall term, but bioactivity in the dictionary, the true definition is any effect on, interaction with, or response from living tissue. I've extrapolated that into dentistry, that a bioactive material is one that when placed into the tooth structure, it'll react in such a way as to strengthen, desensitize, and remineralize that existing tooth or possibly the adjacent tooth. Now, if you think about that and just think of that definition that I have coined, the first thing you're going to think of is one of the early on bioactive materials. You're going to think of glass ionomers. Well, it kind of fit the bill. It strengthened teeth somewhat. It desensitized teeth somewhat. It remineralized teeth and recharged by fluoride release and recharging from that saliva. And it had the ability to exert an effect. If that material was in a box, it could exert that effect on adjacent teeth. So glass ionomers and its evolutionary type products were kind of the first to have bioactivity in them. You might be able to make a case for silicates, but really glass ionomers. Now, bioactivity wasn't a hot button then. It wasn't a term that needed to be used or was used then. So that term was not such an active term, if you will, at the time. It wasn't just used a lot. As we've evolved in our profession, as we looked at minimally invasive dentistry, the term bioactivity has emerged to the forefront and has become a hot button or a term, especially when we focus on restorative materials. If we look at Shofu's composites, their flowables, their bulk fills, their traditional composites have chemistry inside called a giomer. Now, a giomer is a pre-reacted glass filler. That filler has a glass core that's reacted with polyacrylic acid. And what it inherently means is that unlike glass ionomers that need light curing and water absorption for ion transfer to occur, Giomer fillers are protected from water absorption and material degradation by a surface modified layer. Yet the exchange happens within the tooth structure. That pre-reacted glass core filler is responsible for various ion release, for fluoride recharge, and for acid neutralization into the tooth. Now, this all happens behind the scenes. We don't see any of this, but this is what happens in that filling material. And if we look at that pre-reacted glass core and we look at the ions that are leaving, we have silicate, aluminum, strontium, borate, sodium, and fluoride, each of which that has a specific responsibility. You know, the fluoride remineralizes, the borate, the strontium, the silicate desensitizes. So each one has fluoride, is able to kill bacteria. So each one has a role in the process. But now we got to think differently, because in the old days, I would have cut 2 boxes here and I would have compromised that marginal ridge. But if I have a bioactive material, one that can remineralize, one that can desensitize, one that can strengthen the tooth, then I can attack the decay in a vertical fashion, go into that proximal wall where that decay is, break through that wall, yet leave the peripheral rim of enamel fully intact. This is a product called the Wedge Guard. It's from Triodent. It is a wedge that has a stainless steel band in place, blocking this inner proximal. Now I can go through an adhesive process. Now, I will tell you this was restored with Shofu's beautiful Flow Plus in 2 increments. If you go back, it's a little bit deep. So I did it in 2 increments. I went through an adhesive process, selective etch of the enamel, internal bond, and placed beautiful Flow Plus. The first thing you see before I take my band off is how aesthetically pleasing beautiful Flow Plus is. And I did not polish it at all. That's what it looks like unpolished. Watch what happens when I take out that wedge. When I take out the wedge, I have restorations that absolutely disappear into that tooth structure. Now, if you look once again closely, the peripheral rim of enamel on both bicuspids was completely preserved. In the old days, I would have busted through this. I would have had a restoration with a large proximal contact. I would have had to make sure it was perfect, and I would have decreased the life of that restoration. So I've learned from the old days, most important rule, that I want to be minimally invasive. So that's rule number 1. I've learned from my mistakes, and I want to be minimally invasive. And by the way, I know what many of you are thinking. This looks routine. But I got to tell you, as a clinical teacher and lecturer, the number 1 question I often get is in direct restorative dentistry, how to get a tight proximal contact, how to eliminate white lines on preparations, how do I make my fillings disappear into the tooth, and how to decrease sensitivity. We're going to cover all of those tonight so we don't make mistakes anymore. Now you say, tunnels were a fad. There's no chance tunnels are coming back. Well, here's a study, strength of tunnel restored teeth with different materials and marginal ridge height. Premolar tunnel restored with beautiful flow, F02, which is what I used, at 2.5 millimeter distance from the marginal ridge, were as strong as sound teeth. Now, I did that. Let me take you back. I did that restoration without ever seeing this study. I'm not going to lie. I found this study for this program, and I was blown away because it reinforced the logic that I used of preserving the marginal ridge and using a Giomer to do that. Another journal, because I like to support what I do with evidence-based research, restoring proximal caries lesions conservatively with tunnel restorations. Tunnel restorations can be an option to restore proximal caries if the dentist performs proper case selection and pays attention to the details of the restorative procedure. So tunnels are okay. Are they different than what we're used to? Is it going to look different on a radiograph? Might an unsuspecting, uneducated dentist throw a colleague under the bus? Yes, yes, and yes. Does it mean we shouldn't do it? Absolutely not. If it was your daughter, what would you want for that premolar? Would you want a blown open proximal, or would you want that restored in a tunnel? Now, I can look at things a little bit differently. It's a high caries patients. These are aggressive preparations. But look, where I had a chance here on the left to restore a tunnel on this already compromised restoration, I was able to maintain the peripheral rim 260 degrees, let's say, 270 degrees. Let's give you a better shot of that here on the right side. We were able to maintain that peripheral rim wherever we could. Could I do it everywhere? No, you can't do it everywhere. You are defined by the caries. So look, I got 2 boxes here. It's not like I can do this everywhere. I cut boxes. I don't want you to think I'm a purist and I only do tunnel preps. But if I can maintain that peripheral rim, I will. What about the mesial of number 30 here? This happens to us all the time. We cut open a proximal and we see the discoloration, the early inception of the caries process. Okay, we see that. We absolutely see it. Now, what do? Do you leave that alone? Do you watch that decay? Do you take this wall out? Do you take, and this, because you can't cut a box here, you're going to take this entire wall out, and now you're looking at an onlay maybe. What do? Well, here, what I did is I sealed the inner proximal. Sealed the inner proximal. What's this guy talking about? Well, Premier, and Shofu make bioactive sealants. Shofu has Beautiseal, and Premier has BioCoat. These are bioactive sealants, sealants that have ions that can seal that process and hopefully prevent it from progressing. So I placed an inner proximal sealant. I know it's unorthodox, but I wasn't going to leave that alone. I couldn't leave that alone, and I was not going to cut that wall down. I etched it, and I sealed it. Could I have put a flowable there? Yeah, it would be a little too thick, I think. But I etched and I sealed it. Here you could see my tunnel. You see that I've busted hole. The enamel is paper thin. But I preserved that marginal ridge. This slide just tells a lot. It's a maximally invasive tooth. Look how much decay was here. I had to remove. Yet I have minimally invasive nuances here and here. Do not, let me take you back one. Here is your early onset demineralization. Don't watch those anymore. I know it's not going to be covered by insurance. You tell that patient, I don't want to cut your tooth down, your son or daughter's tooth down. I'm going to put an interproximal sealant. It's going to be $80, $90, $100. What's the difference? You are helping that tooth survive longer. And here you could see, you do not see that at all. I didn't prep it. I didn't do anything to it. All I did was etched it and placed an interproximal sealant. And Beautiseal will work fine. Now I've selective etched. I place a light shade of beautiful flow on here so it could be seen. I've created my matrix, rock solid contacts. And now I have biomimetic restorations on there. Conservative tooth. Look, I got part of that composite here. I got a composite here. And I got a composite here. All lined with Beautiful Flow Plus, all restored with Beautiful Flow. But you can restore with anything that you like. Just make sure that your floor has Beautiful Flow Plus so you can get the release of the ions on there. Beautiful Flow Plus comes in 2 viscosities. What I would call a zero flow, that is a thicker, if you will, and one's a regular flowable. I love the zero flow because I can manipulate it where I want. That is the red stripe or red syringe, and the blue is the regular flow. Where things can go wrong. Dentists don't follow instructions. And I know many of you are laughing because I get it in my programs all the time when I say it. We don't read instructions and we don't follow instructions. We believe that all materials will perform the same, but unfortunately they don't. First of all, air drying the adhesive. Is it the same for all products? If a doctor is switching his adhesive, his or her adhesive, what must he or she know? Well, you need to follow instructions, because let me show you 4 different adhesives. These are all adhesives. They all serve the same purpose. Voco is Futuribond Universal. Agitate the adhesive for 20 seconds, air dry for 5, cure for 10. Shofu's Beauty Bond. Leave on for 10 seconds. Air dry for 3 seconds lightly, then stronger for 2 to 3 seconds, light cure for 10. Kurari's Clear Fill SC, leave in place for 20 seconds, then air dry. So each one of these, while they serve the same purpose, each functions differently. Yet, when was the last time you bought an adhesive and you pulled out a list of instructions? We just don't really do that. It's just not something we do. So that's one thing I want you to take away from this, that we have to understand that we have to read instructions and follow instructions all the time. Now we talk about air drying the adhesive. And is that the right term? The answer is that it might be. Do we have to blow air? Do we have to air dry hard, air dry slow? What do we do? That becomes very, very important. Why we dry the adhesive is, first of all, number one, to evaporate the solvent. They all have solvents, which is really, really important. And number two, you want to spread the adhesive out so you have a thin coat. Those are the 2 most important reasons. When you thin or air dry, then you really should do 1/2 inch away, half air pressure. You don't want to wave that syringe. So that's really, really important. All adhesives should be saran wrap, really thin and glossy. And the solvents must be dried thoroughly for 10 seconds. But now, when we talk about air drying, what's the first thing we do with our air water syringes? We wave them in the air. We wave them on our pants. We press the buttons. We get that water out. That's an important step. You can't have contaminated lines. You just can't have contaminated lines. Really, really important that you have to have clear water lines. So that's really, really important. When you do air dry the adhesive, you want to start softly, and then you want to, from a little bit further away, and then you want to blow harder. How long do you air dry for? Well, you don't want to blow your air too hard. You don't want to blow your air too soft, and you don't want to do it for too short a period of time. So what I would say is you start slowly 10 seconds away, and you blow harder as you get closer. So Van Marbeek in Dental Materials 2010 wrote an article, and he said you should gently air dry from a distance, 1/2 inch for 3 to 5 seconds, depending on your bonding agent. Then continue with more force as you get close for 2 to 5 seconds. Do not simply blow hard for 1 to 2 seconds, as you're going to displace a significant amount of your bonding agent. So here's a simple solution. What I want you all to do tomorrow is call your distributor, Henry Schein, Midway, Benko, Patterson, and install air-only syringes on the assistant side. They're inexpensive. There's no water that can come out. There's no need to bleed your syringe, and they kind of look like this. It's a one-button syringe, and we have them in all our operatories, and that's what we use to air dry or thin out our adhesive. Now, the other problem that we need to learn from is when we're doing traditional class 2, what kind of matrix we're going to use. Most of us still use Tafelmeyers. Most of us still do not use sectional matrices. Why you should use a sectional matrix is, number one, it'll give you a perfect proximal contact every time. Number two, if you wedge it properly, you're not going to solve your gingival problem because you're going to get a complete seal at the gingival margin. You'll have ideal contour. If your tissue is in the way, use a diode laser. Just get it out of the way to remove that tissue. Contour becomes critical. We all learn from our mistakes. Contour is one of the hardest things to do in a class 2. That's okay contour on the left side with a Tafelmeyer. That's more ideal contour we'll get with a sectional. There's so many good sectionals on the market. Paladin Plus, Triadent, Garrisons, Danville's. New one from Premier just came out. There's so many good ones on the market. Just do it, as Nike says. Use one, whatever you're comfortable. They're all designed the same way. They all have a ring. And in the old days, we were concerned about these rings. We were concerned that we would put them on the tooth and they would pop off. Well, now, pretty much all these rings are designed in such a way with a V at the bottom, as you see here, or as you see here, and as you see here, and that V will sit on a wedge. So when you wedge that band into place, you'll have a perfect seal of the gingival box. You want to get that gingival seal ideal. So I look down with a mirror, and I need to make sure that I don't see space at the base of that box where it meets the band. It's got to be totally sealed. It has to look like that. As I look down, I need to see a complete seal. This is the Triadent matrix perfectly in place. Triadent is nicely designed in that there's a little hole here on the matrix and a little pin tweezer that fits that hole, because these are going to be hard to remove. When you remove this, the pin tweezer will fit right in there, and you'll be able to remove that band that's tied up against the adjacent tooth. So we go through our adhesive process. I selective etch. Here I'm placing a desensitizer. It's called Hema Seal inside. It's like Gluma, much less expensive, works really, really, really well. I'll just very lightly blot that so it's moist still. I'll now place my adhesive and I will light cure. I like to see a glossy surface when I light cure. You have a clear image here that you see this box is sealed. And then we're going to place my beautiful Flow Plus at the floor, followed by my composite. In this case, it was not beautiful. It was actually a new composite from Shofu called Viscolor, but you could use any of your composites here. Viscolor is a heated composite designed to be heated, but the important thing is you see perfect contours and you don't see any white lines. Why don't you see any white lines? Because I take a football diamond and I bevel this enamel 360 degrees. So now, where do we learn from our mistakes here? We see white lines, we get lousy contour, we get lousy contacts. Bevel that occlusal enamel, you will not get white lines. Use a sectional matrix, and you will get nice contour and get perfect proximal contacts. And then you say to yourself, are you really cured? Because at the end of the day, you do realize that even a 10-year-old light purchased on eBay will cure the outer surface. Are you cured? That becomes the big question. Are you cured, especially today with materials that are 4 millimeters in depth and you're doing bulk cure? Are you cured at 4 millimeters? So here's a simple task for you to give you some idea if you're cured. And this is Ron Kaminer's redneck test for light curing. If you don't have a radiometer in your practice, I want you to go out and buy a pack of peppermint lifesavers. Those are the opaque white ones. I want you to take your darkest composite, C3, C4, inject it into the center. The peppermint lifesaver is 4 millimeters in thickness, almost 4 millimeters. I want you to hit it for 10 seconds with your curing light, or 20 seconds, whatever you want. I want you to break open that peppermint lifesaver and see if you're perfectly cured the whole way through. And if you're not, you know you have a problem with your curing light. Now, it helps if you have a really good curing light to start. If you know you have a good curing light and you know the players out there, obviously one of the elites on the market, we'll talk about that in a second, is Ultradense Velo Grand, maybe the elite of the elites. You have Kerr's Demitron. It's always been a player in the market. You have the Blue Phase. These are all elite curing lights. Now, most recently, you have a light from AMD Lasers, the Monet, which is a laser curing light, which I've heard there's been some extreme heat issues with that. I know someone that tried to use it on gutta percha, and I heard it melted the gutta percha, but openly I haven't used it. I love lasers, and I love the concept of a laser curing light. I don't have experience working with it yet, but there are a lot of good curing lights on the market. This is not a place where you want to skimp. It's not a place where you want to go to eBay and buy a light for $200 because your restorations will suffer. It's going to be cured on the outside. It's just the restoration is going to fail early. You'll see staining at margins. You'll see chipping. You'll see pitting. You'll see all these things that you may not see immediately. You will see in an uncured restoration. Let's focus for a second on my favorite, the Velo Grand from Ultraden. A lot of curing lights only have a single LED chip which operates on one wavelength. It can create hot and cold spots in the beam, which makes uniform curing nearly impossible. The original Velo curing light was created to answer that problem. With 4 powerful LEDs that deliver a uniform light over a broad spectrum, you know you're getting a powerful, uniform cure. The Velo Grand has that same uniform power you expect, but a much larger lens. Let me open your eyes. Another place we learn from our mistakes. We have an MOD on a lower molar. Where does the curing light go for most dentists? Dead center. I want you to look at the next time you do a large restoration on the molar and put your curing light dead center and tell me if you're able, if you believe you're able to cure both sides of that molar, both sides of that restoration with your existing curing light. What I'm going to tell you is you're not going to be able to. The other thing is that you need to know about your light's collimation. You'll see it in the video I'm going to show you, but I want you to look down here at the bottom. Look at one competitor of Velo and see how the light just diffuses and spreads out. You have some collimation here, and then the light is totally faded. What do you think is happening? 5 millimeters in, 4 millimeters in, right here. Look at a second competitor. You're not even close. You're getting no energy into the depth of that restoration. What about the Velo? You're getting complete cure all the way through. The Velo Grand is the same technology. It's the same technology, but it's a 107 millimeter lens. The average competitor is 48 or 46, 10 millimeter molar coverage. The Velo is 107 millimeters. It's 12 to 13 millimeters of coverage. It's a huge difference. You don't have to worry about getting that distal or that mesial. It has a 50% bigger lens, so you're not going to miss anything. The other nice thing about this light, of course, it's indestructible. It's absolute. You could drop it on the floor. You could throw it across the room. It's not going to break. Let me show you this great video that Dan Fisher the president emeritus of Ultradent did when they talk about surface area of the Velo.
The fun little test that was developed here at Ultradent was creating this little perforated disc. And this perforated disc has tiny little holes that enable clinicians or technicians to address composite into them, forming little composite cylinders. They're polymerized with the curing light. If one is using the standard Velo, it's not going to reach across the periphery of the 12mm breadth of all those cylinders. It will cure very good for all the cylinders it contacts. Another quality curing light, but without the broadband of LEDs, was recently introduced. And as you can see, it also is not going to reach even close to the 12mm diameter. But along comes Velo Grand, and the first curing light ever as an LED to be able to polymerize the full footprint, polymerizing every one of these little discs equally. When removed and tested for polymerization level, when tested for hardness, every cylinder equally polymerized and to the max. It is going to cure all of that restoration in one shot, saving time, but importantly with the certainty that the amount of energy delivered at the periphery of that large footprint, it is the same intensity via every practical reason to that which is located in the center. So give it a drive.
So let me show you another video that shows you more about the collimation of the beam.
The fun little test that was developed here at Ultradent. Here we have a bottle containing a reddish orange light absorbing dye. And many of you have seen this demonstration before with the standard Velo, that when shown into this dye, you can see the collimation of the light, you can see the great performance capability, if you will. But now if we compare the standard Velo to, in fact, the Velo Grand, we see that the collimation is a little better than with the Velo, albeit the Velo still very good. We see that the size of the footprint and how it drives forward is unsurpassed. And if we take it to the ultra high energy level, you can see how much relative greater amount of energy, light energy, is driven forward. So it's Velo taken to a whole nother dimension, to a whole nother level, raising the bar even further.
So now, you can be assured that if I'm using that Velo Grand, that I'm going to be cured through and through. So when I'm curing this molar, I can put it in the center and I'm going to get both ends. If you're using other lights and you're not curing here, and then curing here, and then curing here, I can assure you, you're not curing this restoration 100%. Is it a problem on this bicuspid? No. You'll get that with any light. The problem arises here. That's where the problem arises. So how do we learn from our mistakes when it comes to curing? Number one, if you're not using a Velo Grand, I would cure for 20 seconds on the distal, 20 seconds in the center, and 20 seconds on the mesial. If you're using the Velo Grand, I would make sure to cure it in the center. Make sure your beam is covering everything and cure for 20 seconds. Do not be undercured. You'll be in trouble in the long term. This will always get cured. It's what's underneath that you don't know. So now we get these incipient decay on the bicuspid. Most people would think, should I treat or shouldn't I treat? You can't even see it, but there's something going on here, and there's definitely something going on here. And there's definitely something going on here and something going on here. Now, some people would say I would watch these. And my answer is, what am I watching for? Watching to me is like being a little pregnant. In 9 months, there's a baby. Am I watching for this to get bigger? Or can I aggressively treat this in a minimally invasive way with bioactive materials that'll conserve and preserve that tooth structure? So here is, and this is upside down, here's our tunnel prep. You can see here in the inner proximal, or see here, that there's a decalcification. Here's where I'll place my wedge guard in at this point and break through that decalcification. Look on the right, you'll see right there where the arrow is, you'll see the decalcification. I've broken through. I'm going to selective etch. Some people will ask, why don't I total etch? I'm just not a total etch kind of guy. I like to selective etch. We all know that all the adhesives work better if you selectively etch the enamel. Excuse me. I'm also going to bevel that enamel to avoid white lines. I'm going to place my adhesive. I'm going to place beautiful flow now on this wall and a little bit on the floor. This is not a deep preparation. Why do I extend the fin here? Well, you know what? I did see some decay as I began to prepare here on the occlusal. It was small, but I created a little dovetail fin. I placed beautiful floor. I think this is A1 or A2 on the floor, and I like here that. And then I restored these with beautiful. Notice again the MO of my restorations. Invisible because of the bevel. Beautiful flow always on the floor. Highly polished. Those three things. One of the things you have to realize is Shofu has some of the best polishers in the industry. So you could use Shofu's one gloss on this, which we did, which will give you an outstanding polish. One gloss is a simple polisher that you can use on these restorations. And you see how these are truly bioactive. If you look closely now, once again, I've preserved the marginal ridge on both of these. It's totally preserved. And what you could see here, how this marginal ridge is preserved here and here, and the restoration just disappears into the tooth. It's a total disappearance of that restoration. And I'm confident that a tooth like this is going to be strong for many years to come. So I aggressively treated this, but I aggressively treated it in a minimally invasive fashion. Now, what I've learned over the years is when I look at X-rays, don't judge. Don't judge someone else for doing the right thing. You may not see this box that goes through because we've preserved that marginal ridge. Maybe only a little spot is going to come through. Or if it's just a decalcification and there's not a breakthrough, you may not even want to break through. You may want to just put a gyromer barrier on that wall. This is where dentists get into trouble because they will look and say that this dentist did a bad job, when in fact, that dentist didn't do a bad job. That dentist did a very conservative job and was able to maintain that tooth. So this webinar was put together so we learn from our mistakes. Let's look back for a few seconds, and I'm sure there'll be a bunch of questions because there's almost 400 people on this webinar, so I'll answer any questions. But what did we learn from our mistakes? We learned that we don't always have to cut a box. Cut a box when the decay is extensive, but if there's incipient decay, there's no need to cut that box. We learned that the Tafelmeyer isn't the appropriate matrix most of the time for posterior restorative dentistry, that a sectional matrix will give us an ideal gingival seal with a proper wedge and will give us ideal contours with minimal adjusting. We've also learned that if we bevel the occlusal, we won't see any white lines anymore. And you could do that with a red football diamond, which will work well. We also learned that using a gyromer at the floor or a gyromer restoration is or a Giomer restorative product is the ideal product to use in these tunnel preps because of its inherent properties. And finally, we've also learned how important air drying and curing lights are. Drying properly can lead to a longer lasting restoration. Drying improperly can lead to sensitivity. Having a good curing light will lead to a longer restoration, and having a curing light that does not cure well to the ideal depth will also lead to a poor restoration. So it's okay to learn from our mistakes as long as we're able to progress. And remember, as we head to the question and answer, keep in mind, if nothing changes, nothing changes. Let's go to the question and answer and see what we got. So Dr. Doshi asked, Doc, for the tunnel preparations, how do you charge? As class 2 or class 1? When we perforate, we always charge for a class 2 because really the definition is I have to break into the interproximal. So once I break through the interproximal, I charge as a class 2. If I don't break the interproximal, then of course it's a class 1. Does the tunnel prep technique, Kevin asked, leave undermined enamel in the interproximal area? My answer is, who cares? And I mean that sarcastically, Kevin, yes, because we're not placing amalgam. We don't really care about undermined enamel because we're bonding to it. And I can tell you, I've been doing this for many, many years, and I've never seen a marginal ridge fracture that's bonded in a tunnel preparation. Alan asks, we're doing 2 separate small preparations on the bicuspid, increase the strength versus cutting through the transverse ridge. The answer is, the studies are mixed on there. I would think probably yes, and very often I do that. If there's any deep stain or any decay in the center, I'll always extend, but I've many times cut both on molars and bicuspids 2 interproximal type tunnels. What burrs do I use, particularly when tunneling? Great question, Dr. W. 2 very important burrs. Burr number 1, I use a 330 burr. I get them from Microcopy. I think they make great burrs. So I use Microcopy. Once I see that stain or that decay, I will use typically a half round, and it's important that you angle the burr away from the marginal ridge. Because that marginal ridge is so thin, if you lean on that marginal ridge, you're going to fracture it. So you want to angle away and literally just pop a hole. So you have a marginal ridge, a little wall, a hole, and then the rest of that interproximal wall. Thanks for the nice comments, Raid. What tunnel with tunnel technique, what is marginal ridge minimal thickness to reserve it? That's a great question. I don't have a good answer for you. Ideally, you want 2 millimeters, but I've done it at less than 1 millimeter. And as long as I don't fracture it off, I'm keeping it. Anytime I can keep it, I want to keep it as well. Any concern on pulp temperature with more focused light cure? Do you always do 20 seconds continuously? Thanks, Moran. So Ultradent has done many studies on pulp temperature. And even though that light feels hot, it does not raise pulp temperature to any significant amount that will affect the tooth at all. So I do cure 20 seconds continuously. I never have a problem with sensitivity. And it's only because I'm extremely careful with my air drying and extremely careful with how I light cure. One thing I should have mentioned also, when that sectional matrix comes off, I also do an interproximal cure for 20 seconds right through the enamel, because I want to make sure, even though I know that light's going to get down to the base of that box, I want to make sure that I cure through the buccal and lingual walls. So I'll give a quick cure buccal and lingually as an extra precaution, just to make sure I'm fully cured. Any other questions? I see a lot of nice comments from people. I appreciate that. Again, tonight, I was only supposed to do half of this webinar. I had to scramble at the end to add a bunch of slides. So I hope it was enjoyable. I hope you learned a lot tonight. Any other questions before we'll end a few minutes early tonight? So if there's no other questions, again, I appreciate all the nice comments. This is webinar number 39 for me. I want to thank all of you for joining me. I got a few more coming up before the end of the year. We're going to break into the 40s. And again, please friend me. For those that weren't on early, please friend me at Vino Dentino, VINO, on Instagram, where I show great new technology. Plus, I discuss some great wine. Thank you again. I hope you all enjoyed. I love doing these. And thanks for the attendance. Have a great night.